Hello everybody, thanks for listening in again to the Photopocene podcast with me, Josie Purcell. It's a podcast where I share eco-conscious photographic art in an audio way. This time I was joined by an amazing photographer who's based in New Orleans, and that's Natasha Sanchez. We had a fantastic chat back on Earth Day. So I'm really happy to be sharing this podcast on World Environment Day as well. When I chatted with Natasha, I learnt all about her thoughts on how we are nature, even if we sometimes feel separate to it or act as if we can conquer it, and how this influences her work. We spoke about projects such as her Tiny Plains series, which touches on this, and her fascination for the American landscapes and human movement through her Louisiana and Ancient World Tour series. We also spoke about how the time of Hurricane Katrina impacted her sense of place and how our homes are often within ourselves. The conversation covered her mandala-inspired work, which is created with things found very close to hand in her local environment, and also a mutual love of lumen printing, particularly how the power of unfixed lumens can reflect the power of nature. But there's so much more in this podcast, so do carry on listening to Natasha and find out more about her. I'll give you all the details you need to look up her work at the end of the podcast. Well, hello, Natasha. I'm really pleased to be speaking with you today. It's actually Earth Day, so it seems like a really wonderful day to be chatting with you about your work. So welcome to the Photopocene podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I love that it's Earth Day today. So perfect day to have this conversation.
Absolutely. Now, I know that your work in relation to the environment is sort of rooted around our place within the environment, and how you see the world and how we have an effect on the world we live in, what we create for ourselves. What would you actually say then in relation to our place in nature, how that informs your photographic work?
Well, I kind of don't separate my personal, human nature from the natural world, from the environment.
Yeah.
So my primary art form right now is lumen prints, and I incorporate nature into all of my work. I have other art forms as well, songwriting and photography, regular photography, but I think all I'm trying to do is tell my own story, and it just, I use our natural world to do that, because that's the world that I'm in. And so, and I don't really separate a great moment you might have in a conversation with someone, or, passing someone on the street and just saying hello. You might get just a nice feeling, a good vibe from that. To me, that's nature. And so that sort of forms the basis for what I do.
I like that you can see nature in things that, rather than just what I guess people might consider when they hear the word nature, what they might instantly visualize. It's really nice to hear that you see it as more than that.
Right.
Yeah, I like that. That's really, really lovely. And I was actually also, you mentioned probably one of my favorite words in photography, which is lumen. And,
right, yes.
I know that we share a passion for lumen printing, and I'm really keen to talk about a new project that you've started recently. But actually, before we talk about perhaps the lumen work, I'd like to have just sort of touch on some of your other work that I've seen, which is on your website. You have two. That one's called 35mm Travels, and one's called Tiny Plains. And I was quite intrigued by both of those. I think with the 35mm travels, you might need to explain a little bit more to me, but there was one where I think you had a megaphone,
Yeah.
which I thought was quite fun, but I don't, maybe you could briefly touch on that. I just thought that looked really fun. And your
that's Betty.
That's Betty. So,
Yes.
so what's Betty's relevance to your, your work?
So Betty was a project I started before I started doing the lumen prints. And Betty was a bullhorn, not necessarily gifted to me, but came into my possession when I worked in the film industry, working on movies. And the person, I was working a job, and you know, sometimes if you have your own equipment, you can rent it out to the company. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, here, you can use this bullhorn and you know, rent it out." And then we could never arrange a time to get it back, and it just ended up that, you know, Betty became part of my possession, and I just gave her a whole story. And she in turn became like this outspoken activist. I think it was a way for me to put my ideas without any identity of me. You know, that Betty said that, not me. I think I took the role of her manager. And actually, I'm looking at Betty right now. She was injured in a fall a few years ago. So I used to loan her out to friends for different events, and mostly like charity type events. And but she fell off the cabinets and fell off her perch, and I did surgery. I repaired her, but you know, she's in retirement now. So
bless. Well, I just thought it was a really lovely
yeah, she was a voice, you know. It was just a different way to have a voice. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, sometimes for me, I sort of the humor of that as well as the message that she was perhaps sharing and or allowing you to share.
Yes.
Enabling you to share. But yeah, I love that. With your tiny planes work as well, I think I was quite intrigued by that, because I guess on a personal level, particularly in the last year when obviously with the pandemic and air travel was so much less, and looking up at the skies and not seeing any plane trails, and now they're starting to come back. So there's something about looking up at a big blue sky. What was it about that then what was it behind that project? What was the idea?
Well, the idea, again, it was just sort of incorporating, you know, my world. It was actually just what I saw. So prior to the pandemic, I used to lead photo workshops in the French Quarter here. And I did that for about 10 years. And it was mostly to people from out of town, you know, tourists, teaching them photography and using our French Quarter as the backdrop. I did a very similar route. You know, I had different people all the time, and I would change the route every so often, but the subject matter was always the French Quarter. You're never at a loss for things to shoot, but I started shooting lens, you know, and it was a way for me to shoot something different. Anytime there was a tiny plane, it's like, hold up, you know, the group. And, you know, they're not necessarily interested in, you know, they're on vacation in New Orleans. They don't want to shoot tiny planes. And then, I mean, it got just kind of, we did the Garden District, which is a very different neighborhood, you know, with lots of trees and plants and all of that. And I'm like, oh, whoa, you know, tiny plane. And then I just kept doing it. And I didn't even notice, to tell you the truth, until I started to put some of the images together, like how much it was just ingrained, you know, oh, there's a tiny plane. And for something like that, you know, my biggest art form is I just actually like to think. So I just think a lot. And you know, they're so tiny, you can cover it up with your thumb, you know, and the whole, you know, sky view, the whole world. And I just have this, especially in the past year with the pandemic, I have this fascination by the human idea that we're sort of conquering nature. Like, that's just not the case, you know? and it's ingenious though, flying and what we can do, but then it's not, you know, in terms of ramifications of that. And we're not necessarily working with nature. And we think there's so many areas, you know, especially in the last century, you know, where we think we have the upper hand. And then when things happen that make us see that we don't, you know, it's very hard for people to understand, you know, it's just not in our consciousness that not just that nature comes first, but that's where I come back to my idea that we are nature. I mean, we're just another element of it, you know.
Absolutely.
And so that the tiny planes, I haven't done an exhibition or anything with yet. It's still, I actually have a lot to sort of add into that gallery, and it's something that I'm always thinking about. And especially recently, there's a naval base near here, and the planes they do their training, and the planes have been going crazy the last few days. So I don't have any military tiny planes, but that would be good to put in the mix. Yeah.
Well, I just found it really fascinating. And I think that, like you say, maybe that is when you look up sometimes at the sky and there is a plane way above you. You know, there is almost that juxtaposition about us being here on the ground, and oh my goodness, there is actually something just in the sky.
Right. And if you think about being in the sky, like when you're in one of those planes, and especially in how the world, you know, the planes just became a different car, you know, like it's just people are they commute back and forth to work. I mean, it's not even you know, prior to the pandemic, it's not even a thought, you know. And when you're up in the plane, you still think your world is bigger, you know, like, than what it really, not that we don't have big worlds, but you know what I mean. It's just like at the same time you are like this tiny piece of a large world up in the sky.
Absolutely. Now, one of your other projects that I wanted to talk about, and I think this one might, from my understanding, would sort of has influenced a later project, but is the one called the Louisiana World Tour.
Right.
I found that quite a fascinating piece of work because you're melding music, images, performance. I think you've created a book and a blog out of it. Is that right?
Yes. It started as a blog. It started it started about 10 years ago. And I had always wanted to travel the world, right? And then it came a time when I was ready. But I realized I didn't actually have to go anywhere. I'm very influenced by Ralph Waldo Emerson and Thoreau and you know, writers of that, the Transcendentalist and all of that. And especially Emerson's idea that, you know, talks a lot about traveling, you know, going to Europe. But if you're taking from here to Europe or something, and if you're taking all this baggage, your own personal baggage with you, I mean, have you gone anywhere? You haven't left, you know, you could be anywhere else in the world. So that is actually the main basis. And it started, as most of my projects do, with no intention of doing anything with it. It just, I wanted to see the world, and I thought it was a good time to travel the world. And I didn't realize how and I had some influence from people giving me some ideas. I was also at a crossroads. I didn't know I had actually just started lumen printing. I had just done my first exhibition with that, but I did all this music. I have Betty the Bullhorn. I had all this stuff and I didn't know what to do. And I just, you know, a friend of mine's like, you should just go on a world tour. And, you know, he was a friend that's more in my music world. And, you know, he thought it was funny, like go to open mics. And another friend said, yeah, you should go to like Athens, Georgia, you know, and places like that. And so I started in a neighborhood actually where I'm from in New Orleans is a neighborhood called Algiers. And so I started there and I did an open mic there. And then I did my first road trip. And the photography took over. I had it was originally meant to be a music thing. I was going to do a road trip, take some pictures, but always go to a place near like an international town, and do an open mic or something. And but the first road trip, I was hooked by the idea of it, and I did not realize how large the world, even of course, in the U.S., we're going to have names from all over the place, right? But it just became something I did over like 3 years, just occasionally going out on the road, and I blogged about it, and that blog eventually became the book, which I did not do until 2019, but it needed a complete form, and prior to the pandemic, I was always rooted in the music performance idea with my photography. Like I was actually going to tour with that book, and I was starting to book some stuff when the pandemic happened, and I was going to incorporate doing cyanotype workshops and things like that, because not on my website is a very different world tour that I've done in the years since. And I haven't decided if I want to put it out in the world on the website, because it may change over time. That's the change,
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Yeah.
So that work there was very much around sort of images of where you were, the sort of the environment you were in, then the actual images from that.
Yeah. What I liked what kept me on the road, the main thing, for photographic purposes, for artistic purposes, I had a plan of, I made a plan of the only thing I needed to do was find a sign with the town name and take a picture of it. If I hadn't given myself that perimeter, I would have stopped a million times along this street and like shot some birds or it would have taken me hours to get there. I had to make it to the town and shoot something with its name. But what happened is, Louisiana is a very probably everywhere is just, it's very diverse, in the landscape. And I come from South Louisiana, which is more marshes and and I'm actually from a little town north of here, which is more pine trees and and all that stuff. But we have different areas of the state, and they're all very different. And the Louisiana World Tour, I mean, I knew that, and of course I had been to those places, but it gave me a different lens. And what I liked the most was, again, that vibe feeling that I was talking about. Like I actually compared. I went to this is kind of blending into another project, but an offshoot of Louisiana World Tour was a project that started out with various Native American mounds. And I had gone to Poverty Point on the World Tour. Because I figured it was there are Native American mounds that are thousands and thousands of years old. And in the US, we're not used to talking about our history in that way. In the US, you'll hear, oh, this country is only a few hundred years old. And well, it's true, the country is, but the land's not. We've been here, and there have been people here for many years. And I remember I had gone there, and I actually just recently went back there, but it was just, it was the first time I had been on the World Tour. And I just got this amazing feeling of being there, and just thinking about another part of the human element is these are, large earthen works, basically, built by hand by people carrying baskets, that they made from, and over years, I forget how many 100 years these were made, and the dedication to that and the respect for that is something that just really intrigued me. And those type of places are all over Louisiana. And I mean, they're all over the states, but I was focusing specifically on Louisiana at the time. And so it was hard. And every time I went somewhere, I'd pass one of those mountains, so it was hard not to have that good vibe and just be influenced by it.
Is that sort of tying back then, as we sort of, when we first started talking, it's almost that a sense of place, but your sense of place doesn't have to always be one place or what you're used to. It could be other environments, but you still have you feel a connection. Is that how you've sort of felt about those places?
I think that connection is something, that's something that's key, because we're all connected, and with the Native American mounds especially, what I thought about that was these were people just living their lives, just like we are, they would move locations, right? They moved around, they didn't stay in one place for a long time. And so for me, when I'm talking about like our place within it, it's where we are in the physical moment. Of course, our minds take us elsewhere, but we're always connected. I think all of our experiences are just within us, whether they were good or bad. And like we have connections everywhere. And and so does everyone else. Like we are all, on this earth doing the same thing. Like our goal at the end of the day with all, stuff that's our goals are always the same. We need food to eat. We need, we need water. We need all of that. And so I think for me, just, I also started like, I probably have some influence with that with Katrina, because I think I did not get flooded out of I'm in the same place that I lived in, but I remember thinking on, being away from home for a few months after that, thinking that I was so tied to my physical place, to my neighborhood, to my apartment. And there was a few months when you just weren't sure if you would be able to get back to that, and so I wanted like my own home to come from within and be able to insert myself, wherever. And the thing is, I never left the home or the neighborhood. Still here. But I still kept that that whole idea, but then it kind of plays on the whole Emerson idea of, just living sort of true, and that whole idea with baggage or whatever. So anyway,
it will go with you even if you
right.
I mean, your world tour, as I understand it, Natasha, was actually then followed by another world tour, but referred to as the Ancient World Tour.
Right.
And I think this is where it starts also including you're probably starting to produce more of the lumen printing work within that. Is that and modern fossils, I think, is an element of that. What's that all about, and how did it come out of the world tour, the Louisiana one?
Right. Yeah. The original idea for the world tour was I was going to do, for the Louisiana World Tours, I was going to do Southeast US. Then I realized how international Louisiana is, and for artistic purposes, to give myself a boundary, I just did Louisiana. But all of the Native American mounds that I came across were a big part of it. And I included one, the Poverty Point that I mentioned, in the world tour. And in my blogs, I often mention them. There's an ancient mountain trail that the state has, so you have some markers where you can see some of those mounds. And so I always photographed them, even if it was just a quick snapshot. I always stopped by them. And I remember one reason why because I do a lot of things is why I didn't publish the world tour for a very long time. But also I wasn't sure what to do with it, because it started on the cusp of me doing lumen prints. And I was getting more and more involved with that process, and they just seemed like two completely different projects. So I was originally wanting to incorporate lumens into the Louisiana World Tour. And then I realized it's just a separate thing. So what I wanted to do, back to that idea of kind of being amazed at, the Native Americans of thousands of years ago walking the same land that I'm walking on. It shifted a little bit as land does, but a lot of the elements are still here. There was still moss on the trees. There was still, things like that. Like, and I would I wanted to print those. So I have a thing for tiny things. I like very small things, obviously, like tiny planes. um, I'm a detail person. The detail makes up the large picture. So you can't have a big picture without details. And like it just doesn't, otherwise you wouldn't have a picture. So I would take just a little blade of grass or a little just teeny tiny flower and print that on a negative on a 35 millimeter strip and as a lumen print. And that became modern fossils, which is modern fossils. I still print them and I call them modern fossils, but some specifically I refer to as the Ancient World Tour. And also just looking at our area here in New Orleans, Algiers, again, where I'm technically from, in the whole area here, it was cypress. It was nothing but a cypress swampland, and there's a great book about New Orleans called Accidental City. It's not even supposed to be here, This is just the French, that settled the area being like, I want it here. It was originally the French government had wanted this city, the major port, to be north around where Baton Rouge, another city, is, and it's higher ground and all of that. But anyway, but we got established here, and of course there's flooding and all these problems. So I made some lumen prints of cypress and just envisioning what Algiers, what this area would have looked like in ancient times, And so, and then and then I went down to Venice, Louisiana, which is the southernmost tip of Louisiana. If you look at it on a map, it's there's a little, it's a boot shape, and right at the tip of the boot is Venice. And I've been down there a lot on the world tour, and it doesn't have long for this world. It's going to be underwater, relatively soon. But anyway, I love the area down there. I mean, it's just it's nothing but water, lots of birds. But that's where I took a lot of the modern fossils from, and it's only. People that visit here just think that the coast is so far away, and I'm like, it's 70 miles. Like it's just literally down the street, So
that's not too far. I mean, I've got to be on. I can beat you a little bit because I do live on the coast in the UK. So I'm only 5 minutes from the coast, so I've got a little bit on you there. But 70 miles is not that far.
Yeah. This isn't a coast like with beaches. We do have Grand Isle, but the Gulf is different where we are. You have to travel a few hours to get to like a nice beach scene. But still it's not. But still, the literal Gulf is not that far.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the environments, like you say, talking about where you are and what you've found and the history of the place, and taking that. And using that within the work as well. And you've exhibited modern fossils, haven't you? That's been on show.
I did a performance with some of the World Tour songs that took place in those areas. And so I did like a one-woman show so kind of a multimedia presentation, and then an exhibition of the photographs at the Algiers Library. And that was forming the base. And right after that, I released the Louisiana World Tour. So in my mind, I had to do the Ancient World Tour first.
Yeah.
Even though the Louisiana World Tour came first. But no, I had to do Ancient. And then a few months later, I released the World Tour. And then in the spring of 2020, I was beginning to plan the Solar World Tour, which was something else. But that's the one that I'm rethinking. But so I actually had those, all those came, but they all came, the idea of the Louisiana World Tour, for all of the talking that I did about it, the main premise of it is the world is as large or as small as you see it, and that includes your own personal world, as you want it to be, rather. That includes the world we live in, your day-to-day life and also the natural world, because when you're from an area, you get used to it. So as a kid, I'm not like marveling at oak trees or anything, that's just trees. And I started to develop more of an appreciation, for it as I got older. And, so, and some people just, sometimes you just stay put. Like for a while, I was kind of staying put, but that doesn't mean that, and we've all been staying put this past year, but your world can still be large. It's how you see it, and everybody's got different circumstances. It's not a projection on anybody.
Yeah, no.
It's just on me, but just talking about my own experience, it's like, that's exactly actually how I got into lumen printing, was that same idea. How do you want to look at the world?
Well, I think you saying that is really interesting, and especially in relation to, because I am a kindred spirit with your love of lumen. I need no convincing when it comes to lumen printing. And last year, and I think you probably started it just before the pandemic really took hold, is a project you've called Mandala Monday, which I believe is shared on your Instagram account.
Yes.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I am actually looking at some of the work online now, and I some really, they're all beautiful, but there's a few that obviously have caught my eye. There's one that's quite celestial in its in its look, but you've done that with items that you've found quite close to you, or that you've found when you've gone out on a walk. So although that was started before the pandemic, how, as sort of being in your own local environment and within your own home, how's that then influenced what started before the pandemic for you to then carry it on through the pandemic?
Right. That, I mean, the beginning of that project was one of the strangest things for me, because I got the idea a year prior, seeing a book of someone that made natural mandalas, and I thought that was a cool idea, and I was like, I want to try that. I had just been doing some workshops, some cyanotype workshops, and I don't have a UV light box, but I had one for this workshop, and so I was playing around using it at night, playing around with making mandalas in it, just like I had seen in the book. And and this was, I think, March of 2019, and I really liked it. And at the same time, I knew I had to stop. I was like, I was in the midst of finishing up the world tour and all of this, and I'm like, this is a project for 2020, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it, and that's highly unusual for me. I've always got my fingers in a million different things, and when I get an idea, I usually just do it, and I don't always put it out, that takes me forever, but in terms of, I'm just in it, when I'm doing the work, but I stopped it, and that was a bold thing for me to do. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I mean, I thought it was kind of odd, but whatever. So I decided it's going to be a weekly thing. I was intending to do more performance. So I thought that I was going to take the world tour out on the road. I was beginning to book it, and I have another series of feathers that I kind of used in the same way, where I wanted to keep myself grounded in the lumen world. I wanted to keep printing, but I really had to focus on, this whole performance prepresentation workshop series, so I needed something just for me. Like most of this stuff I really do for me, and so I started it. And then when the pandemic hit, the very first one I think that I shared was some leaves, and I left it unfixed, so it was blue to give like a calm feeling, and which it became a little prophetic, because those leaves came from a tree that later got chopped down later in the year. And so it was really kind of strange. But then we're just home during the pandemic, and this project grounded me, right?
Mm.
The idea, actually, I thought I'd be I was booking some stuff in Louisiana, but I was planning on taking this series out on the road and to different states, and I was kind of in the process of booking all that. So I thought it'd be cool, like, to find just natural mandalas and wherever I was. So, like, that was the original thought. And then I was just home and just creating my own world, but I don't think that I haven't even really thought about it. It's like I'm a walker. I walk every day, and with the pandemic, those walks got longer,
Yeah.
and and so yeah, it was just like, and with everything going on in the world, like you see the news, you see what was happening, and there's so much uncertainty and trying to figure out your own world. Every week I had some leaves to arrange in a circle or something, or just using stuff out of my kitchen cabinet. And what ended up happening, it was weird when I went back through them at the end of the year. And even just a few months ago, I kind of put a little story of them together on Instagram, but it was really, really interesting to go back, because they essentially were a photo album for my 2020.
Your 2020.
And I'm like, this is not necessarily how you would think of 2020, But one thing I love about lumen prints is they're just real. They're just, this is a leaf and here's the detail, like it's a contact print.
Yeah.
This is literally what my world looked like. Like, if I had to just be brutally honest, it was that, and it's lovely, all this stuff. And it also became, if times were tough, it was I used it as expression in those times. My aunt passed away from COVID, and so I made like a memorial one for her. And the tree, I used the tree a lot because it was a huge part of my house and studio, actually. And I think I did like a memorial one when I didn't print any. I did my own mourning period, where one week I didn't print, but I posted like the best of the camphor tree. And but it was, and then there was a time when it stopped. In the fall of last year, things were very 2020 for me. It wasn't necessarily, things weren't necessarily happening to me, but just the things going on around me were. It was a lot, and so I made mandalas. I didn't necessarily post them, and then some weeks I didn't. But for what you see on Instagram, I have like a million more, and right. So I kind of filled in the spaces with mandalas that I had made and thought fitting for those weeks, and but yeah, and it was the perfect project. That's why I'm kind of amazed at how I put it off. It's like, how did I know I needed this?
Wait, yeah. And I mean, it's beautiful work. I really, really have been drawn to it, and so I really do like looking at those. I mean, all of the work, but yeah, that's very. I think because of my obsession with lumens. Certainly.
Yeah.
But you're now working on a new project, and I think that is also going to be using lumen printing. And do correct me if I'm wrong, but is that sort of meant to be a commentary around human innovation and the power of nature? I mean, and what is that all? What are you doing? What's that all about?
Okay. It is. It's heavily influenced. It's based around the pandemic. I just started this in May of last year. It's a series of unfixed lumen prints, so they have to be scanned. Which is, again, I do that sometimes. Like the colors might be really cool, so I'll scan one, or something like that. And only in recent years was I willing to do anything more than just the original. But anyway, to create a whole series of unfixed lumens, it first freaked me out, but it started because of the idea. Well, I mean, the first few months of lockdown, I have to say I kind of loved. So it was a really good creative time. It was, I'm always trying to get artist residencies. And so it was like taking the artist residency, but not going anywhere, you know, but it was, I was doing a lot before the pandemic, and it was hard for me to, you know, that's why it takes years for me to put one project out, because I'm always running around, you know. And so I had the time to stop. And one of the best, but then, and I'm taking these long walks and I'm gathering, you know, random things for mandalas, or just taking, I love lizards and lots of lizard crap, you know. So it was, but then you come home and you read the news, or you see the news, and, you know, there was just such time of uncertainty. There was just so much, you know, the online was just really hard to be on social media or anything, you know, and so it was this weird juxtaposition, you know, and it's like, okay, so human, you know, our society is kind of collapsing, and or so it feels. But nature's thriving, you know. I mean, I was waking up, the weather was insanely, it was nothing like this year. It was perfect last year during the lockdown. It was cool temperatures, sunny skies. It was the kind of spring that you always want. And so that I would feel guilty about that.
So. No, I absolutely understand that. I think we're not alone in feeling, like you say, putting aside the hideousness of the pandemic, that initial first time when it was almost a period of quiet.
Right.
You know, a time that, if you were fortunate enough that, you know, you were given this almost like an opportunity to reassess and just sort of find some sort of peace if you've been running around really busy and just constantly doing and
right. And peace, I mean, that was that's a great word for the time, because it was such a peaceful time. And what it afforded me, the actual launch of my new project, was this one thing that I love to print that I hadn't been able to print in years, and that's termites.
Oh, wow.
I had done, I had printed termites years ago. They swarm in May every year. And there's a few days in like April or May, whenever it is, that you have to keep the lights off in your house, you know, because they're attracted to the light. And all the street lamps are covered, you know, with just the swarms. It's really intense, you know, for a couple of days. And not everybody, and me, if I see one termite, I just shut everything off. You know, I'm like, I don't want to hear. But if they get in your house and they swarm, you know, they die like almost immediately. And so anyway, there's a friend of mine had, the way I printed them like 7 years ago was, I was with a friend and we walked into her house and they were all over her stove, and she was, oh my goodness, you know, horrified. And I'm like, give me a cup. And I just scooped them all up and went home. And I have to say that I'm like the most squeamish person on the face of the earth. And it's hard to believe because I print a lot of bugs, but anyway, I made prints, but I hadn't done it in years because I'm never, you know, they don't swarm in my house, and I'm never around collecting termites. You know, so anyway, so last year, you know, they swarm. My friend was like, hey, you want some termites? I'm like, sure. And so I made a mandala. One of my mandalas is actually a termite mandala. It was the weirdest print I've ever made in my life. But and I made it on a negative, on a little 35 negative. Termites arranged in a little circle. It's on my Instagram somewhere. But anyway, I took one of those termites, and I just wanted to see if it would fit inside of a switch plate cover, you know, like for your lights.
Okay.
And it did, and it made a cute frame. And then of course my brain likes to think. And so termites can take down your house, right? I mean, they're like, collectively, they're very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, and of course I have special bug tweezers, you know, like holding them, you know, in the bug tweezers, holding them up to my finger, you know, my fingernail is bigger than these termites. And but the power that they have, you know, is pretty intense. And like, so I should be able to just squash this termite. But if this termite got into my house, then the house could easily be destroyed.
Yeah.
And so I just started thinking about the power of nature, what nature can do. And of course, we have lots of hurricanes and things like that. And, we're in all the water issues. We're well aware of the power of nature. And so I just made a series with those switch plates and with a little piece of nature in the center. And this is, I'll probably, be printing these ongoing, but I am putting them together specifically in a certain way. That's why they're not done. Printing them a certain way and kind of frame. I want to hang them so that they're kind of translucent, and it's more of a commentary on the two of us working together. Human innovation is we created light, right? We created false light. It's not natural. These, electricity, but we were able to recreate, what we have every day with the sunlight. We were able to recreate that. Yeah. The advances of technology, the advances of, anything that humans put their mind to, it's mind-boggling, and it's amazing, but it's not always done in concert with nature, and so this is just kind of questions, what if the two worked together, and that's where that came about. And it's, if I can do it the way I want, it'll be lit by nature as well, by the sun.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and that I'm thinking of this video thing, I've got a kind of a release, just an online release initially that I've got going on, that now I've pushed my date back to summer solstice. I hope to have it out.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. It seemed like a perfect time, so hopefully all the pieces and parts. I'm still kind of I'm being a little picky with how I'm presenting them, and I keep changing my mind on stuff. So
that's your prerogative. It's your work. So
Yeah,
exactly.
I'm really in it though now. Yeah, so it's like I had to put it off for a while. At the end of 2020, and then this year, just you just get on these tracks. A little while ago, I started it up again. Plus, it was interesting though. I actually tried to print this. I have enough images that I'm happy with. There's certain things though that I want to include, and so that's what I've been working on the past few weeks. Was and then we had all this rain, so that kind of prevented me from doing that. But I got some that I wanted done. But I did start to revisit this last fall. Yeah. But they're unfixed, and one of the reasons, there's two reasons why they're unfixed, is the color of the paper was what I wanted, and and the other reason is that they're unfixed, but all the original images are still in a black bag and exactly as they were. And they're going to fade, and I haven't looked at them, but they're going to fade in time and eventually just not be there. They're not permanent. Yeah. And so that's part of it too, that, nothing's permanent. Absolutely. And that's one thing that amazes me about human nature, is that we think things are, and work very hard to keep things permanent when it's just it's not possible, and so that's another thing. But anyway, I started to print some more in the fall, but the color was different in the fall because the light's warmer, and I'm doing really short exposures with these, which is unusual. I'm usually printing for a long time. And so the color was off, but I'm like, wow, I like that. I like that it's so influenced by nature, that I had to wait until spring to start printing again, so.
And that sort of ties back to what you were saying, sort of the human innovation, but the power of nature. So you're having to sort of not compromise, that's not quite right, Will, but almost like a seesaw relationship.
Yeah,
it goes up and it goes down. It goes up.
You just have to work with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I am really excited to see that. I'm going to look forward to that. I'll make a note for the summer solstice
yes,
but I won't hold you to it. So don't.
I know, I got it. That's writing it down. Okay.
What I like to do, just to sort of round up our chat, Natasha, is actually ask you, and there is again no right or wrong answer with this question, but how do you actually think photography can have an influence in encouraging people either to take action for nature, do more for nature or their environment, or do you feel it doesn't necessarily need to? People can take from photographic art what they will. What are your views on the sort of the influence of photography?
Well, I think photography is everything. I think it's highly influential. It's how everything that we experience now has gotten to be everything is imagery, and it influences culture a great deal. So I think the more that we use photography, if we saw more image, I mean, of course we see plenty of natural images and stuff, but if it was presented in a way to where it's a necessary part of our lives, and it's necessary to protect and conserve and all that, and it's not a choice, because it's not. And if that is projected more, I think over time that influences the culture, which influences the decisions that are made, which and I do think about that in terms of my work, because you're going to see in a magazine, you might see nature, but it might be an ad for something, what about fine art? What about my switch plates? Like, where's that going? And that's why but that was part of the reason of thinking of like some sort of online presentation that would get more people that wouldn't, they may not go to the exhibition at whatever gallery, but they would see it online, like, how can I communicate? I've always been interested in communicating my work to everybody. I like alternative spaces, I like it out in the world. And I think, as photographers, especially ones that are involved in natural environment, the more that work is seen and sort of shared in a way that influences, I want to influence it. Everybody's got their own mind, right? But it's just, I think, it's always been used. I mean, everybody has an image because we all have minds. So we all have a mental image. So, if we start seeing these physical images, then that kind of helps the way we think about things, and maybe expands, our minds to think that, oh, this is something worth, taking care of. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think with your work, I really want people to go and have a look at it, because as well, I mean, I do feel a bit of a kindred spirit with you.
Yeah, right, of course.
But when, sort of when the people are looking at the lumen work in particular, and then they might be intrigued by the image, but then they want to find out more as well about what the actual work is about. And that's, I think, the difference sometimes between a very, what you would call perhaps a traditional documentary style photograph, a street photograph, that doesn't necessarily completely show the whole picture, because it is what is chosen at that moment to be in the frame. Exactly. But and I really like that element with your work, that you do want to sort of discover more about it when you see it. Where Natasha, can actually people find out about you and your work? Where can they go to see your work? Website, social media, any upcoming shows that you might be having or you're in?
My website is www.natashasanchezcreates.com, and that's a good overview of all of my work. I have social media. Instagram is natashasanchez.creates. I'm on Facebook as well. which I should change that to Natasha Sanchez Creates. But right now it's Natasha Sanchez Photographic and Musical Musings. And yeah, and then coming up, I don't have any shows coming up. I will be doing some lumen print workshops here with the New Orleans Photo Alliance, an organization I work with. Yeah. So, but I'm not even sure when that
is. Well, I will make sure all of these links are in the podcast text as well, so everybody will be able to find you and find out more about your work as well. I just want to say a really big thank you for you joining in and taking part, and I'm absolutely loving the fact that we can be in very different places but still have a great chat about what you're up to, and it doesn't really feel like you're thousands of miles away, so that's
no, and thank you so much for doing this. I mean, these conversations, with people that do this kind of work. I mean, it's great. It's it's something that's necessary out in the world. I think conversations spark images, so it's good.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, that's fantastic. And so thank you once again, Natasha. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that was a really wonderful chat with Natasha. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed learning all about her work and what makes her tick. It was really also interesting to realise that there's someone else in the world with a bag full of unfixed lumens too. And Natasha will hopefully have some new work to share around the summer solstice, so do keep a lookout for that. Head on over to her website at natashasanchezcreates.com or follow her on Instagram at natashasanchez.creates. And if you'd like to tell me about your work and how you perhaps use photography in an eco-conscious way or use it to raise awareness of environmental issues, please go to my website, josiepurcellphotography.com, and get in touch. It'd be lovely to find out what you're up to and maybe invite you onto the podcast too. Till next time, bye.